Hello and welcome to Betfair's mid-season report cards. I'm joined by Harry Stanley, and the first team we're going to talk about today are the Adelaide Crows, who find themselves in the top 8 after half a year of football so far. How do you reckon the Crows have gone so far?
They've outperformed what I expected them to this season, Karl. They've played really good footy. They're 6-5 so far, so much better than I thought they would.
He's a tackling machine, Sam Berry. You had him as a player that could potentially have a breakout season, but there's been a few injury issues, hasn't there?
Yeah, so Berry, he's averaged a limited 10 disposals, 6.8 kicks, and only 1.5 marks this season, and that's mainly due to an injured calf in round 3. He spent 4 games coming back through the sandful, came back against the Doggies, had quite an average game, and so then went back into the sandful team in round 11.
He was almost given the captaincy. Tom Duday, how's his season gone so far? You had him as potentially best and fairest Smoky.
Tom, again, he's had an identical start to last season. What he did, he's averaging only 16 disposals, 9.2 kicks, 4.9 marks. In the 10 games that he's played, he missed 1 game there. And although these stats are below average, it's what I expected from him. He's not really a ball getter. He's more a direction player in the back line. He's setting up behind the play, and I think he's done that really well. So he's still a chance to win the BNF.
Well, a player that I want to talk about is Jordan Dawson, which I'm going to ask you about in a moment. But you didn't make him a best and fairest Smoky because he certainly knows Smoky. But he's really become a Brownlow contender on the Betfair exchange. In recent times, he's gone from $14 into $11. So potentially some trading movement out there for the Betfair punters. But tell us about Jordan Dawson's season, as someone that watches the Crows a lot. How is he having influence on games?
It's been incredible. Jordan's probably having the best season he's ever had. It's only his second season at the Crows. He's the captain of the side. He's really leading from the front. He's averaging 27 disposals, 17.4 kicks, 4.5 marks, and even 5 tackles a game, which is pretty elite numbers. And come Brownlow night, we could see him up the top of the leaderboard there.
We definitely could see him really figure for the Crows there. So tell us, Harry, about the season prediction that you made at the start of the year and your summary so far about how the Crows are going.
Well, the Crows have really outperformed my expectations so far this season. 6-5, I think they're at 108%, which isn't amazing percentage, but they're inside the 8, which I think I predicted them to finish around the 15th mark. And now, with the way they're playing and how strong they are at home, they don't look like they're going to lose a game at home, especially, that game against Brisbane, a great performance at Adelaide Oval. So I'm expecting them to at least finish the season with a record of 12-12, and hopefully they can get a couple more wins in there.
Yeah, it really looks like they're going to make finals. And you talk about Adelaide turning Adelaide Oval into a fortress. They've played amazing football there, and especially against Carlton, it was almost a coming out game for them. Did you have any betting strategies that you wanted to go with, Harry?
Yeah, I did. I think Jordan Dawson is currently $11.50 on the exchange to win the Brownlow, so I think that's a really good play there. And also, Crows are $2.20 to make the top 8. We do have 2 games against Gold Coast and West Coast, so you'd think that they win those games there. A couple of tough games at Collingwood, they might lose there at the G. Essendon, you never know with Essendon how they're going to perform. They're quite a strong side, and we saw that in the Anzac Day game against Collingwood. But really, I'm expecting them to make finals now. So $2.20, I like that play.
Well, they certainly have exceeded expectations, as you say. Well done to the Adelaide Crows, and looking forward to following your betting strategies for the rest of the season. Brisbane are going great guns at the moment also. They're in the top 4, 8 wins, 3 losses. Daz, how have you seen Brisbane's season so far?
Yeah, first 3 weeks they were pretty patchy. They got flogged by Port in round 1. Then they beat Melbourne, which was a good win. Then they lost to the Bulldogs. Then they beat Collingwood. So they were up and down in the first month, but have really stabilised since then with some good wins over Essendon and Fremantle and the Giants and Carlton on a Thursday night or Friday night, I think it was, at Marvel. Won 7 in a row, put themselves in the mix, and then a frustrating loss to Adelaide. They had moments against the Crows. Adelaide are hard to beat at the Adelaide Oval, we know, but Brisbane kicked 1 goal 9 in the third quarter of that game and shot themselves in the foot, and then obviously the Crows kicked 2 rippers and sort of put the game to bed. But it's probably that's the one thing for Brisbane maybe. It's just that forward line cohesion. They've got so many guns down there. as to whether they can put it all together. But they'd be pretty pleased, I think, with what they've done.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Daz. Under pressure, we got to see what Brisbane are made of. In the pre-season, you had Zach Bailey as a potential best and fairest Smokey. How have you seen his season so far?
Yeah, I think he's been pretty solid. He's been kicking goals, and he's also been, getting a little bit more of the ball. He had 26, 27 on the weekend. He's been increasing those numbers. I think he's a very similar player to guys like DeGoey and Bolton, who can get 20 and kick a couple. So obviously Lockie Neal and Harris Andrews and Josh Dunkley and Charlie Cameron have all been very good. But Zach Bailey, I think, is one of their most important players.
Have you been surprised by the dominance of Will Ashcroft this year?
Not really, only through calling the NAB League or the under-18s. He had a very similar year last year to what Nick Dacos had the year that he was drafted. That they were getting similar numbers in the NAB League and impressing to the same degree. Both father-son, both likely to go in the top couple. So Ashcroft slotting in the way Dacos slotted in at Collingwood is probably not hugely surprising, but no less impressive to be getting 23.5 possessions a game in his first season. He's already kicked goal of the year, so I don't think anyone's taking that off him.
What about Cam Rayner? Have you enjoyed his season?
He's been solid. Yeah, obviously there's probably still a little bit of room for improvement in him, but he's been serviceable in helping Charlie Cameron down there. And I think Oscar McInerney, he's been spending more time in the ruck now that both Hipwood and Danaher are available, but 31 hitouts and 6 clearances a game. That's not bad for a ruckman, certainly someone who hasn't spent his entire career in that position.
Well, you've got Danaher and Cameron firing in the forward line. Where can Brisbane lift around the field? What players can step up?
So obviously with Danaher and Cameron firing, they've still got Hipwood, who's averaging 9 possessions, 4 marks and a goal. Lincoln McCarthy averaging 10 possessions and a goal. Jack Gunston averaging 10 possessions and a goal. All three of them very good players, but with that much firepower, they probably want to spread that a little bit more. Danaher playing well, Cameron playing well. But if they get all 5 up and about, then they become very hard to play against, because who do you go to? At the moment, they're probably looking at it going, Hipwood and Gunston and McCarthy, we can control them. It's these two that we've got to put our homework into. If they can get a bit more of a spread, then they've got the most firepower in the competition.
What are you going to make of Brisbane in their second half of the year? How are you going to see them go?
Yeah, they're the only team to beat Collingwood, which counts for something. They're also the only team to kick 100 points against Collingwood, so that counts for something. And they've beaten Melbourne, who they might play in a final, having beaten them last year as well. They've got so many key games. They've got St Kilda away on a Friday night, Melbourne away on a Friday night. They've got Geelong. They've got Collingwood away at Marvel, which is an unusual venue for that game in round 23. And then they finish with the Saints again. They've got Fremantle in Perth. So I think the 2 games for them, if they're to confirm that they can win the premiership, they play Melbourne at the MCG and they play Collingwood at Marvel in the last 6 weeks of the season. So I think we'll know whether they're capable of winning the flag or not after those 2 games.
You talk about Brisbane being the only team that has beaten Collingwood and kick 100 points against Collingwood. The caveat being it was at the Gabba, but can Brisbane finish top 2 this year with Port going so well? And
if they beat Collingwood at Marvel, the question would then remain, well, you're going to beat them at the MCG. So yeah, it's look, they've done most things right this year, and they've been up for so long. It's very rare that a side is around the top 4, 5 or 6 years in a row, and that's been Brisbane. Yet to play in a grand final, so they'd be hoping that they can take that next step.
Any betting strategies you want to have, Daz?
Well, so at the start of the year, we said they were $2.06 for the top 4. They're now $1.30. They were $1.33 for the top 8. They're now $1.03. So if you back those 2, you're just about home free. I still think Joe Danaher, Coleman and Lockie Neal-Brownlow are the value. Lockie Neal-Brownlow especially. I think he's a proven vote getter, and if he gets on a roll, he's as good a chance as any.
Look, and it doesn't mean that they could potentially win those medals, the Coleman and the Brownlow, but their prices are quite large at the moment, so there's potentially some trading strategies there.
Taking a look, Karl, at the Blues, probably the most spoken about club in the competition, I would say, this year, and even before the season started. But how have you assessed their first half of the year?
Well, they obviously started, I want to say on fire, probably not. They drew their first game against Richmond and then won 3 in a row against bottom sides. And then they've just failed to go any good since then. Only 4 wins for the year so far and a percentage, again, under 100. Carlton have been very disappointing. We did lay them at the start of the year, but the strategy was a little bit different. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, the Blues certainly haven't lived up to expectations so far.
Now, the forward line's been a big talking point for them, and at the start of the year, you addressed someone, not one of their key tools, but a small who could potentially have a breakout year.
Yeah, Jesse Motlop obviously was a player that I really touted as someone that could have a breakout year, and he's improved in all his first year metrics. Slightly, not much. I've been modest. I think Jesse has probably been a victim of Carlton's forward line woes at the moment. Probably the ball's not coming in great. What we did want to see from Jesse is a lot more sort of forward pressure and stuff, and he has acted on that. He's increased his tackle count. Look, we're still waiting for Jesse Motlop's breakout game. I don't think it's too far away, but Carlton's forward line as a whole probably have to get moving. I'm not going to put the full blame on them. I think the midfield have to do a better job of giving the ball, giving good service to the forwards inside 50. But yeah, I think Jesse Motlop, we're still waiting for that breakout game.
And I think a bit of a smoky for the best and fairest. You mentioned a player who has been a bit of a barometer for them, really. They've been patchy and he's been patchy. When he's been very good, they've been very good, but just hasn't quite been able to put it together all the time.
Yeah, you've absolutely nailed that, Daz. Mitch McGovern has proved to be a bit of a barometer for the Blues, and I know when he's playing, the Blues are more likely to be a winning side. Look, his season has been a little bit inconsistent, one that I can't really put my finger on, because when his output is good, it's very, very good. He's intercepting the ball, and I love him down back. We've just got to figure out a way to free him up, and that's Michael Voss's big job. He seems to not really thrive when he's playing on a direct defender. When he's playing his best football, he's a third key tall. He's floating across packs and obviously taking big grabs. So yeah, Mitch McGovern still has a lot of improvement, but the thing I will say about him is it's great to see him on the park. He's a very good player. You'd be silly not to say he's a good player, or maybe naive. I think he's a fantastic player. I'm just looking for, now he's had that consistency on the field. Hopefully just Michael Voss releasing the shackles a little bit off him and letting him attack.
Have you had a genuine surprise packet in a year that I wouldn't say bleak, because they're not entirely out of the question, but someone who's put together a really strong season?
I think when you think about Patrick Cripps and Sam Walsh, you probably put, and even the season of George Hewitt last year and to some extent Matt Kennedy, you sort of put Adam Cerra to the side. He was maybe the fifth pick of the bunch, but he's just turned into a fantastic footballer, which is not that surprising considering he's coming into the prime of his career. But with those other midfielders, we sort of forgot about him, but he's having a career best season. I just think he's fantastic. He's averaging above average number for disposals, kicks, handballs, marks, and AFL fantasy points. And he's increased his career average for tackles and clearances as well. His best came in round 6 against St Kilda, and he had 39 touches. That's an absolute monster game. He's playing more of that defensive midfielder role, but it's good to see him, be that player that Carlton gave up so much for. So yeah, it's great to see Adam Cerra playing good football.
Fascinating watch, Carlton. They've had a lot of guys that are producing enormous numbers. A lot of their team numbers look very high. It's just not translating, like inside 50s, clearances, midfield numbers, intercept marks. A lot of it looks pretty good. It's just turning it into something that's obviously leading to 4 points more often than not. How do you assess the season? And you did speak at the start about the betting strategy was to lay them when the draw was tough early. And what does that sort of mean for now?
Yeah, so funnily enough, I mean, we laid Carlton at a very short price at the start of the season, and we wanted to trade off when their price drifted after potentially losing to Richmond and Geelong in the first 2 rounds. They drew to Richmond and then they beat Geelong in a fantastic game at the MCG. Their price actually didn't drift that much, and it only drifted after they sort of that midway through or quarter way through the season. What do we do with Carlton at this point? They're obviously value if you think they're going to finish in the top 8. They're more than $5 now on the Betfair exchange. I think that their chances for top 8 seem pretty grim at this point. So probably not looking to back them into that market. If you're looking to have a bet, maybe Charlie Curnow for the Coleman to take it out. He's currently now moved into the favourite. At the halfway point of the year now, he's leading the Coleman by 2 goals and taken over Jeremy Cameron. Daz, I'm keen to hear from you. Is there anything you think Carlton could do to improve their season?
Yeah, it's interesting. So given there's one extra game this year, that's a 23-game season, they're 4-6-1. So 12, 10 and 1 might get them in, so they'd have to go 8 and 4 from here. You mentioned over the next month. They've got Melbourne, which you never know. Then Essendon, almost 50-50, Gold Coast and Hawthorn. So a bit of a winnable opportunity for them. But yeah, they've just got to sort out what they're doing forward of centre. I think that, Wiedering and Doherty and Saad are doing a good job for them down back. Midfield is very deep. It's just turning that into, look, Harry Mackay's clearly out of form. His confidence is down. They've just got to find a way to get him supporting Charlie and just getting a little bit more cohesion in the front half.
Michael Voss has a massive job, and I think a few key points that he should address is you've got to unleash the shackles of Mitch McGovern and, for that matter, Adam Saad. Adam Saad needs to be the player that we go through, the Carlton Blues go through at every single point coming out of the back line. He's a player that's daring by foot and he wants to go through the middle of the ground. Stop using the boundaries and move the ball quickly through the middle of the ground. That's going to give the forwards more opportunity to lead in better space and obviously get away from their defenders. That's the first one. Fitness has probably been telling for the Blues. They're not able to finish out games. I think another main one for me is they got to go into a game trying to win. I know that sounds a little bit silly, but it seems like Carlton go into their games and they sort of know that, they're going to be around the bouts. They're going to try really hard, but where's the killer instinct? They have to go in trying to win, and that could potentially mean that they lose the game. They miss kicks inside 50, they miss kicks inside to the corridor, but there's no dare. I would probably rather see the Blues have a crack and lose the game rather than not have a crack and then still lose the game.
Yeah, the side I'd compare them to in that space in terms of what they could do is Brisbane. I think Brisbane play a very bold, attacking, especially when they were developing style of play. I think Carlton's structure is similar. They could play that way with what they have, and probably not quite as... I know Brisbane at times, if it falls away, it can look ugly, but that's the risk you take. They can blow sides away. So I think Carlton could conceivably look towards that as a model for which they base themselves on.
Collingwood, they're going absolutely great guns at the moment. 10 wins so far, 1 loss. They're first on the ladder. Daz, what do you think of the Pies so far?
Yeah, absolutely flying. 7 wins in a row. So they got beaten by Brisbane at the Gabba back in round 4, but have answered every other challenge. They beat the 2 sides that beat them in the finals last year in Geelong and Sydney, who obviously haven't had great years. They beat improving teams St Kilda and Essendon. They did all of what they did last year, sort of coming from behind and showing that resilience and running games right out. They are at the moment on form and by most measurements clearly the best team in the competition.
Who did you pick pre-season as a best and fairest Smoky?
Best and fairest Smoky at the start of the year was Jordan De Goey. Now Nick Dacos is probably leading Collingwood's best and fairest, but De Goey's had an outstanding year, averaging 24.5 possessions a game and kicking goals. So he would be in that top 3 with Nick Dacos, and Darcy Moore, one of the competition's best defenders, would certainly be up there. But De Goey has justified Collingwood's desires to sign him in the off-season.
That's right. We've obviously loved the season so far of Nick Dacos. That's an easy one, but we've also loved the output of Ash Johnson.
Yeah, we noted Nick Dacos as a potential surprise packet, only in the sense that we thought he might catapult into Brownlow calculations. He was $24, I think, to win the Brownlow at the start of the year, and he's favourite now. So he's still been a surprise packet as a second-year player. That's extraordinary. And Ash Johnson kicking, a dozen goals in the first part of the year has really helped them. And an honourable mention to Billy Frampton, who's had to play ruck and back with Darcy Cameron injured this year. So he's been very good, and Brodie Myercheck on track for a career best season.
Yeah, Brodie Myercheck's having a fantastic season too. Anyone that can lift from the Pies, Daz?
So Jack Ginnivan got suspended by the AFL or by the club in the pre-season, struggled to get himself back into the team, has made a sluggish start and injuries have limited him. 6 games, 6 goals, averaging 8 possessions. So he can certainly give them a bit more. He kicked 40 goals last year, Jack Ginnivan. And obviously Dan McStay, their recruit from Brisbane, got injured in round 5. So they'll hope to get him back to give them a bit more. Jack
Ginnivan obviously has started as sub a couple of times this year, but obviously the recruitment of Bobby Hill, although has given them depth in that area, probably doesn't bode well for Jack Ginnivan.
No, that's right. And they've got so many of those players that can go through there. De Goey can drift forward. Elliott's a very good player. Even Hoskin Elliott can play there. Johnson, they've had guys like McCreary and these sorts of players. So they've got so many goal-kicking options.
They're short price favourite now in most markets, team markets. Is there any betting strategies potentially for the Pies that you could look into?
Well, so obviously Nick Dacos was 24 for the Brownlow, now about 4s. So that's that may open up potential trading options later if you feel that he's vulnerable in that race. And the Pies were still about $2.10 a day or so ago for the minor premiership, and I think they're the biggest certainty of all time to finish on top of the ladder.
Wow.
So I reckon they're on track for a 20-2 season and the flag.
Currently 6 wins, 5 losses. Daz, how have you seen the Bomber season so far?
Yeah, been very good. I think they've absorbed a tough draw. They got to 5-5, having played Melbourne, Collingwood, St Kilda, Port Adelaide, Brisbane. Then they played West Coast on the weekend and got to 6-5. They got North this week. It does open up a bit for them. So coming off the base they were at last year, I think they've been, pretty pleased with their work. They should have probably beaten Collingwood. They led by 5 goals at 3/4 time. Let that one slip, but have played a pretty good brand of footy.
You earmarked a couple of players for the best and fairest as smoky choices at the start of the season. I reckon you've nailed both of them, haven't you, Daz?
Well, I hope so. Nick Martin obviously burst onto the scene last year, kicked 5 goals on debut in round 1 against Geelong, but averaged 20.7 possessions a game this year. He's kicked 7 goals. He's Essendon's 5th highest ranked player this year. And Sam Durham, obviously, we remember him kicking the winning goal against Richmond in the Dreamtime game, but averaging 17 possessions a game. And they've had a couple that have broken through. Will Setterfield, who they got from Carlton, has been pretty good. And Jai Menzies, small, fleet-footed, small forward, hasn't dominated, but he's been lively for them in the forward line. So they've had a few.
And you've also got Sam Draper and Mason Redmond as those 2 players that you think will be in the higher end of voting.
Yeah, at the start of the year, we had a look at them as potential breakouts. Draper didn't finish top 10 last year, which was surprising, but his averages are up a bit this year. And Redmond averaging 22.6 possessions a game. That ranks 3rd at the club. Obviously, Zach Merritt's going to be pretty hard to beat. He missed a game with suspension, but he'll get a lot of votes. And Jordan Ridley tracking along pretty well. And Kyle Langford, probably worth mentioning him. He's been pretty important for Essendon forward, given Peter Wright's missed the entirety of the season.
I mean, behind Ridley, I think Sam Draper's actually probably the most important player for Essendon. He has been so good, and I think when they're playing their best footy, his robust self, crashing into packs and having a bit of fun as well. Daz, let's talk about a summary. What do we expect of Essendon for the rest of the year?
Yeah, so ultra competitive, should have beaten Collingwood. Fixture gets a little kinder for them. They are young, so the question is, will they maintain that run the whole way through? Obviously, they might get Peter Wright back later, which will change their structure. Certainly a run at the lower part of the 8 is possible. It looks likely that they'll be competing with, we could probably big picture it and say that there's maybe 4 teams that'll definitely make the 8. So let's say that would be Brisbane, Collingwood, Port Adelaide, and I think Melbourne. And then you got probably 7 teams fighting for 4 spots, of which Essendon would be one of those, with Fremantle, St Kilda, Carlton, Adelaide, Sydney, those sorts of teams along the way.
So we saw the return of Anthony McDonald, Tippin Woody. He returned from retirement. How have you seen his season so far?
He's been modest so far. He's obviously a dangerous player, but 4 goals in 5 matches, averaging only 8 possessions a game. He is a very good pressure player, but obviously they'd like him to get a little bit more of the football. And Dyson Happell started the season scratchy. He's been a little bit better in the last couple of weeks, and hopefully for his sake, who's been a leader of that club, that he can really push on.
A betting strategy for Essendon?
So I think, given the fixture opens up, it's still a good time to get on them for the top 8, because they've got a few relatively soft kills to come, and I still think they're beyond $2 at the moment. So I like them, because even if you want to lay off a bit later on, they're going to shorten in the next few weeks.
Now we're going to talk about the Fremantle Football Club, who have had a topsy-turvy season. They started awfully, but now they've won their last 4 games, and they're currently sitting on 6 wins at the midway point of the season. Tom, is that a team you're interested to talk about, the Freo Football Club?
Certainly, Carl. Yeah, they've really hit their straps, winning 4 on the trot in leading up to their bye. So that'll really please them heading into the second half of the year. But as you said, really topsy-turvy year. They lost 3 of their first 4, and some quarters were calling for Justin Longmuir's head. So it's interesting how the season works, and certainly it'll be good in the second half of the year to see if they can continue their form.
Well, there was certainly big expectations on Freo prior to the season starting. They were very short in the top 8 market, and even top 4 market, they were quite short. But let's talk about rising stars, and you labelled Heath Chapman as a potential rising star for the Fremantle Dockers. How's he gone so far this year?
I did, yeah. Heath Chapman, unfortunately, has succumbed to 2 bad injuries. Firstly, to his calf. He was expected to miss 3 or 4 weeks. He recovered from that, and then now he's got a long-term hamstring tear, so that is 6 to 8 week injury. So unfortunately, hasn't been able to get a crack at it thus far this season. But it's particularly unfortunate because actually in round 1 against the Saints, he had 22 disposals and 8 marks. So started the season well, and unfortunately, we haven't really seen him again. So.
Yeah, it was a player that Freo were probably planning to have play most of the year.
Absolutely.
And became actually quite a big loss for them. And you have a look at their form, it probably parallels that a little bit. Best and fairest, I mean, Andrew Brayshaw was another one that was missing his best form, Brownlow medal form almost last year. But how do you think he's gone so far up into the midway point of the season?
Again, Karl, another player who's sort of... swings and roundabouts with Freo's form. He's had an okay season to date, I'd say. Not quite hit the heights of last year, but certainly his recent form is more reflective of the class player that he is. In the first 6 rounds, Betfair's own Brownlow medal predictor, which you can find on the Betfair hub now, they registered Brayshaw for just the 2 votes. Whereas since round 8, he is predicted to have polled 8 votes. So it's no surprise that that's coincided with Freo's 4 consecutive wins on the trot. So, Brayshaw's averaging 28 disposals, a career high in clearances, showing that he's still the barometer in Freo's midfield.
Well, just while we're on the Brownlow predictor, Andrew Brayshaw is predicted to be going, have the most predicted votes so far for Fremantle on 11, but just behind him is Caleb Sarong, the high draft pick from a few years back, and he's predicted to have 10 votes so far, and he's my big surprise of the year along with Luke Jackson. But let's talk about Caleb Sarong so far this season. He's averaging 30 touches, 30 disposals per game, and that's in the elite category, and that's up from 24 across his career, 15 kicks, 14 handballs. But the one I really think is just shows how much of an impact he's having for Fremantle this year is his clearance are up from 5 last year to now 7. So that's just a great indication of someone that's a massive ball winner, and he's had a couple of 35 plus games. The other one I want to talk about is Luke Jackson, and he did start the year poorly given the expectations of his big contract, first year at Fremantle. But in his last 9 games, he's kicked goals in 8 of them, and I think that's the key to Luke Jackson being a really good footballer at Fremantle. He's got to put score on the board. But the other thing that he's doing is he's getting a lot of football. He's following up. And one of the things that was really stood out to me in that grand final for Melbourne a few years back was he turned the game on his follow-up effort out of the ruck. He'd tap and run, keep the momentum going forward. And we missed a little bit of that last year. Maybe it was the contract talks getting to his head a little bit. But I really like the way he's building into the season. He's following up his good work. But
he certainly played a great game against his former club at the MCG, Karl. He actually probably had Max Gorn's measure in many respects in that game. So I was just wondering, Karl, in terms of Freo's second half of the year, what do they need to do to cement themselves firmly into finals contention and perhaps go deep into finals?
Well, they have to keep on doing what they're doing right now. They've won 4 on the trot. I think the main one is they got to obviously keep their injuries to a minimum, and their stars just need to keep playing well. Alex Pearce has been great out of the back line, and then obviously we've got Nat Fyfe, who's still trying to pick up some form there as a forward, maybe a little bit of extra midfield time.
Luke Ryan's been really good in the back.
Luke Ryan has been absolutely amazing too. He's averaging in the high 20s for disposals per game. Jaeger O'Meara is the one that's getting into the engine room. So when you name players like that, Jaeger O'Meara, Caleb Sarong and Andrew Brayshaw, you don't really actually need Nat Fyfe in that midfield. I think they're doing a terrific job as it is. Nat Fyfe has just got a fire up forward. If he becomes the dangerous Nat Fyfe that we've known him to be, the dual Brownlow medalist.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just don't see him at this late stage in his career being able to learn, old dog new tricks and all that sort of stuff. I don't see him being able to become that elite forward Freo need. I think his last few weeks have been very good. I think if you put him in the midfield for spurts, that's where he'll do his best work, and that's why he's a champion, obviously. So,
well, hopefully he can continue to get better as the year go on, because the AFL is going to be better for it. Let's talk about betting strategies. Tom, have you got any? I've got a couple that I'd like to talk about.
Yeah, so our pre-season bet was Freo to make the top 8 at upwards of $1.94, Karl. And that's, at the moment, obviously they won four on the trot, as we mentioned, and they're now $1.99 in that market. So if you wanted to go again in that market, you could, and that would probably be a wise play. But they have momentum now, and they've got Richmond, GWS, and Essendon in the next 3 weeks post-bye. And that's a chance to really build on their form, and they're firmly on the watch list for mine. What about you, Karl?
Well, I just wanted to note on the back of that, recently they were $3.85 to make the top 8, but after last round they've dived into $1.91, and that's an improved probability of 26%. That is a massive firm for Fremantle for the top 8. Look, the ones I want to talk about is the Brownlow medal, and I'm not necessarily giving this as a tip, but I'm labelling it as a strategy that punters should potentially look at. Andrew Brayshaw is obviously in amazing form at the moment. He's currently sitting on 11 predicted votes and $36 for the Brownlow medal. You'd have to think that one more 3-vote game, which given his form, is a massive possibility, and he's going to dive into odds less than 15, so there's potentially a trading strategy there. Another one is Caleb Sarong. Punters aren't really that firm on Caleb Sarong. He's been playing some really good football, has 35 touch games, and he just doesn't seem to be firming as much as he should be in the Brownlow.
They haven't really caught on to him, have they?
Not yet. And it's one that punters need to keep an eye out on. But he's predicted to have 10 votes and is currently on $32 on the Betfair exchange to back. So another one that, who knows, if he gets a 3-vote game, could see his price affirm considerably. We're going to talk about the Geelong Football Club and talk about an intense worm. They've been doing so many different things. They're 5 wins, 5 losses now, 7th on the ladder, so they're still in the top 8 halfway through the year. But Daz, let's talk about Geelong.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating watch. So the first team since North Melbourne in 1976 to lose their first 3 games as reigning premier. North still made the grand final that year in 76, so that's a pleasing sign for Geelong. But after winning the next 5, they dropped 3 in a row again, Richmond, Fremantle, and then probably the most alarming was against the Giants at home, where they very rarely get beaten. So yeah, question marks for the Cats. They've been a wonderful side for so long, and you would never, ever count them out. They're just as likely to come out and win the next 6. But I think they're at a little crossroad juncture in terms of where they go from here. How much, fight have they got to dig in and try to do it the hard way?
They've had a couple of injuries. Obviously, Cam Guthrie and Patrick Dangerfield have missed big stints on the sidelines for Geelong. A player that's filled in the captaincy role has been Tom Stewart. How have you rated his season?
Yeah, he's been an excellent, he's an intercept king, one of the best pure defenders in the competition in terms of what he gets. But yeah, it's been a difficult void to fill. And for Geelong, it's really been a case of A, personnel, B, maybe the responsibility on some of the kids, and then maybe, you wouldn't say hunger, but obviously they've had that desire to win that 4th flag in this era, and they got there, as to whether they can still reignite that spark.
And I've loved the season so far of Max Holmes. What do you think of him?
Yeah, we thought obviously last year he missed the grand final, got dropped on grand final day due to injury. He ranked 2nd at Geelong this year for disposals, tackles and inside 50s, and he's kicked 5 goals as well. So he's a player that's looked pretty determined to say, look, I'm never going to get out of this side again. So, and Ollie Henry's been a nice pickup, copped one of the most eye-watering injuries you could ever imagine. But yeah, for people can Google that if they want to know what happened to him. But yeah, he's been pretty solid.
Is there a player you think there's a bit of room for improvement in their performance?
Yeah, so Tyson Stengel's missed a lot of footy. Obviously, All-Australian last year. They would hope that he can give them a bit of an impact. And likewise, Gary Rowan and Reece Stanley have missed a lot of footy this year that are important to them. And probably three guys that were very good last year that haven't quite delivered to the same extent. Parfitt, Close and Brian Myers. Haven't been terrible, but they've probably just come off the pace a little bit, and they probably need those guys to recapture that spark.
Just with Parfitt, Close and Myers, it seems like there's so much inconsistency with those players, and they kind of depend on some leadership around the ground, and they're certainly missing it with Patrick Dangerfield and even Cam Guthrie missing a lot of footy. Give us a summary, Daz. What do we expect from Geelong for the second half of the year?
Yeah, so they've had their fair share of injuries, but have also lacked that consistency. The next 3 weeks, they've got the Bulldogs, Port Adelaide away, and Melbourne, which is really testing time for them. Last year they were 7-4, didn't lose another game for the rest of the season, so they're 5-6 now, 2 games worse off than that. Can't see them doing that again, but look, they're always in the frame to make the 8, but I would suggest that top 4 is probably beyond them, and I would suggest the flag is almost beyond them at this stage for mine. So I'd be looking at potentially, because there's still a bit of love around for them, so whether it's laying them for top 4 and then maybe just having a look at some individuals like Jeremy Cameron for the Coleman.
Yeah, I think Jeremy Cameron for the Coleman is quite a good one. 278, I think he's drifted out to 3, so if you get anything in between there, I think that's a good go. He's only 1 goal behind Charlie Cameron currently at the moment. He was just in spectacular form at the start of the year. And also, I mentioned Patrick Dangerfield again, probably the reason for his not down on form, because he's still winning a lot of football and kicking goals. But we were talking about a 100-goal season from Jeremy Cameron, and I don't think it's going to happen now.
If we take a look at the Gold Coast Suns, started the season 1-4. There was a lot of expectation on them to get better this year. They're now 5-6. Karl, where do you have them at the moment?
You say a lot of expectation, Daz, and probably they go missing a little bit up there. I think the only expectation from people is whether or not they probably shouldn't be in the AFL. That's what we always talk about. But I'm a big Suns fan. I love what Stuart Dew's doing, and I hope he can continue to be on that journey with the Suns players. I love the way they play, and I love that they give it their all in all the games they play. So yeah, Suns have been a team that they go missing a little bit up north, but yeah, I love the way they've been playing. Yeah,
it's interesting. You don't get we spoke about Carlton as part of these reviews. If the Gold Coast lose a game, you don't get the pitchforks out the front of the club and people marching on it, looking for change. They're obviously not yet at that profile to build that level of passion and heated support. But yeah, they are steadily on the improve.
I'll tell you what, Daz, if the pitchforks will come out as soon as Gold Coast beat a team lose to a team in the bottom 4 by 50 points, everyone will be talking about whether Gold Coast should be in the league, which I think is horrible narrative. But we should continue on.
We should. You nominated a player in terms of a breakout year. We always talk about the Gold Coast losing players. This is one they got from the Saints last year.
Yeah, Ben Long has obviously come from the Saints last year. Look, he's metrics so far and stats so far have been modest at best. He's still trying to find his feet up north. I think the good thing is that the Suns are winning when he's playing. So there's not really too much to say about Ben Long. All I would say is the Suns need to continue to find ways to get the ball in his hand. I think that they would have liked his hardness around the ground as well. So he's a team player, Ben Long. So yeah, hopefully looking forward to him continuing to progress at the Suns.
In terms of the best and fairest, you're going to chat about a couple of guys that were good mates, that they came from the same junior club.
Yeah, that's right. The first one I want to talk about is Matt Rowell, and he was the best and fairest Smoky from the start of the season. Look, he had a full season in 2022, and he's shown that he's continuing to progress this year. I think he's leading the AFL for tackles, and he's up there in contested possessions. He's having a fantastic year, and I think after one of his games, he had 18 tackles or so, set a couple of records. Some AFL footy pundits came out and said he's going to be one of the best players in the competition in the next couple of years. Look, I probably wouldn't go that far just yet. I think he's got to get his hand on the pill more consistently, a little bit more, and be a little bit more damaging by foot, maybe hit the scoreboard as well. But that's not to say that Matt Rowell hasn't had an absolutely fantastic year so far. And I think he's got a lot more fitness. He's getting around the ground. He's marking the ball. So he's been absolutely awesome. But I think leading their best and fairest at this point, it's safe to say that Noah Anderson, he's my big surprise. I didn't think that he would be that sort of Brownlow medal type in this season or so early in his career, but we've seen Tuke Miller go down with injury and he's stepped up. I'm curious to know, how have you seen his season so far?
Yeah, he's been outstanding. Obviously, kicked the winning goal last year against Richmond, but has emerged, as you say, with Miller out. A lot of people thought that would almost be the end of it, but he was clearly their best player. But yeah, Anderson's been sensational. Obviously, we know that Gary Ablett has won a Brownlow in the past, and Noah Anderson, not entirely without a hope, and certainly would be looking at upwards of 20 votes. So yeah, he's had a terrific year. And you mentioned Matt Rowell. I particularly like his pre-game routine of devouring a section of turf. That's doing that at every venue he plays at, which is there should be more of that sort of quirky stuff. So I hope that never changes. But Gold Coast went 10-12 last year. They're 5-6 now, so they're on track to do exactly the same thing. But how have you rated the year, and where do they go from here?
Yeah, look, my expectations of the Suns are still the same. Like, even if they don't surpass their wins from last season, I don't think that's a massive deal, given the strength and the progression you've seen from some of their key players, especially without Tuke Miller, who they've relied on so much. I've loved seeing the young guns. McPherson continues to develop. Halfback who comes back from an ACL injury, just name escapes me now. He's come back and
Ben King, yeah.
Ben King up forward. Sorry, there was another one across half back. Lockie Weller. That's it. Yeah. Took me a while there. Seeing these players play together and get games together has been a massive positive for the Suns, and I just want to continue watching them throughout the year. A couple of potential betting strategies that I'd look at: Noah Anderson for the Brownlow medal at 50 plus. He's predicted to have around 11 votes at this point of the year. That only puts him 5 votes behind the Brownlow medal leader, and Nick Dacos. A 3-vote game we could see as sort of Zach Butters firm happen, where Zach Butters went $150 into about $11. I think Noah Anderson is a fantastic player, and all the Suns need to do is keep winning to keep his Brownlow chances alive. So a potential trading strategy there. And then what I would be doing is laying when Noah Anderson gets to around that $20 mark. How do you think GWS are going so far halfway through the year?
They've exceeded expectations, certainly, Karl. And with the new coach bounce, I think that'll continue into the second half of the season.
I'm looking forward to having a look at a couple of their players. But in terms of a breakout year, you said that Finn Callaghan was going to have a good year. How's he gone so far?
Yeah, he's provided a great spark for the Giants this year, Karl. Not only has the young midfielder extended his contract actually until the end of 2025, which is a great boost on and off the field for the Giants, he's doing actually exactly what we predicted in the preseason and averaging close to 21 disposals a game, and he's certainly coursing a similar career path to teammate Tom Green, who, as we know, is a fantastic footballer. So
yeah, he's certainly having a great year as well. Tom Green, he's probably in the best and fairest calculations at GWS. I think it's the Kevin Sheedy medal. Yep. But who have you got in calculations? You want to talk a little bit about Toby Green?
Yeah, Toby Green, Karl, he's a personal favourite of mine. I love the way he plays, and I think a lot of people, or the footy public in general, should I say, are probably coming around to Toby a little bit now. He's the skipper. He's obviously the skipper of the Giants now, and he's having a brilliant season. He's averaging his most disposals since 2019 and nearly 3 goals a game, which is a career best. So match-winning displays against the Swans and the Cats, 2 pretty good teams, highlight his importance to the team. And he's been given a new licence under new coach Adam Kingsley, and I think he's a huge chance to claim his second Kevin Sheedy medal.
And the thing I love about what Adam Kingsley has done this year is he's put Toby Green back into the midfield, which I think is a great move. Do you think that's got something to do with his increase in output so far this season?
Certainly, Karl. Yeah, so against Sydney, in which he kicked the match-winning goal, he attended 19% of centre bounces, which is higher than his career average. And against Geelong, in the famous win down at the Cattery, he actually attended 12% of centre bounces. So I think when he goes in there, he gives them a lift. He's a bit of a barometer, and the young players such as Callaghan, Tom Green, Canelio, they all sort of feed off his energy, and I think he's fantastic in there.
I think that's a great call and a great move by Adam Kingsley, obviously his first year as GWS coach. And we talk about Toby Green going into the midfield. Well, they can only do that if they've got support in the forward line with other players. And a player that surprised you a little bit has been Brent Daniels.
Yeah, we did mention Brent Daniels in our pre-season preview briefly, Karl, just as forming part of that exciting young nucleus of the Giants forward line. But he's just been a complete revelation under the new coach in 2023. He's averaging 16.5 disposals per game and a goal and a half per game, which are just outstanding numbers as a high half forward. And he was particularly fantastic against Geelong in that great win at Cardinia Park on the weekend, presenting real worries for the opposition defenders at ground level with his speed. He's a really creative and fast sort of forward pocket flanker type. And if he continues this form, he'll be, in my mind, up in best and fairest calculations this season.
Yeah, I love that, Tom. And it's really important for GWS's list for those young players to continue to improve, because we know at their top end, they've actually got a really, really talented list. I mean, we talk about Toby Green, and he's predicted so far to get 9 Brownlow votes at this point of the season. Tom Green, another one. Stephen Canigulo's having a fantastic season after a couple of seasons of down form. He obviously gave away his captaincy, so maybe the release of that pressure has helped there. Josh Kelly, we forget about him. He's an absolutely fantastic player. Lockie Whitfield is starting to come into the season a little bit, and they've really found one in Harry Himmelberg. He's been around at GWS for a while, but they can put him forward, they can put him back, they can put him in the ruck. So he's been an absolutely fantastic player this year as well.
He's a really important re-signing for them, isn't he, Karl? Obviously comes out of contract. I believe he's a free agent, and a lot of clubs, Victorian clubs, will be sniffing around him. So for the Giants' sake, I hope they can retain him, because he's very important for their build. So
great call, Tom. Well, let's talk about, give GWS a bit of a summary as to how they're going so far. What are your thoughts on their season?
Yeah, so they're definitely exceeding expectations, Karl, and they've actually held up really well in defence in the absence of their gun fullback, Sam Taylor, since round 6. So they've conceded 100 points against just twice in that span, which is quite surprising, because he's the key pillar down there. He's an All-Australian calibre player, and to be honest with you, on paper, I thought the names that, if he were to go down to replace him, they didn't really have the cattle, but Connor Iden, Jack Buckley, these sort of guys have been really impressive and have stood up in his absence. So that's a real positive for them. They've beaten last year's premiers Geelong in Geelong. They beat Sydney in the Battle of the Bridge at the SCG in a last gasp win, with Toby Green kicking that fantastic goal. Young players continue to improve, so I really think the Giants are on the up and up, and with those senior players continuing to play some really inspired football under the new coach, the Giants will win more games this season.
You've just named a couple more, and I like that you've named Jack Buckley. Some footy pundits have him in their rolling All-Australian team so far, which is massive. Obviously, Lockie Ash is another one that is having an improved season. So we've spoken about these core players, which are so good. They're probably missing some depth in the back half of their list, maybe their bottom 7 players. But just a question without notice, Tom, what are GWS missing, you think, in terms of potentially taking the next step?
I think it's their key pillars, Karl. So I think another defender to support Sam Taylor is needed, and I think another key forward to go alongside Aaron Cadman moving forward. Obviously, Cadman's a first-year player, and he's definitely shown glimpses.
And then there's Jesse Hogan as well, who's actually having a very good year too.
Exactly, and so they could use some more depth there. I think their smalls are sorted with Toby Bedford, Brent Daniels. I think that's an exciting sort of combination down there. So if they can find some more key pillars, I think that'll set them in good stead.
No one said anything about having no speed is bad. I think the more speed that they can add into that team,
it adds sort of ground ball pressure, and that's really, really needed in the modern game. So
that's right. So having a bit of a balance between some of those players. I know that Lockie Whitfield was down on form. He probably wasn't showing as much speed in games. He's gone back. He's gone to the wing. He's played at half forward. So hopefully he can find some consistency there. Did you have any betting strategies, Tom?
Nothing for the Giants, Carl. No. So we in the preseason we backed them for the most season wins, and that's not going to occur. Obviously, with West Coast being
Sorry, the least season wins.
The least season wins. Excuse me. Yeah, absolutely. And with West Coast being the rabble they are, North, etc., the Giants won't be finishing on the bottom of the ladder, and they've got more wins to look forward to after the bye with Richmond and North to come. So exciting time.
Right now we're going to talk about the Hawthorn Football Club with Darren Parkin. Hawks, 3 wins. They had a recent big win, a scalp against St Kilda, but they're 16th on the ladder. How have you seen their season so far, Daz?
Yeah, that was their most complete performance. They've been competitive against some good teams. They were very good in the first half against Geelong and the Western Bulldogs, but couldn't run that out. Competitive against Adelaide, competitive away against GWS, but they'd only beaten North and West Coast prior, but that was a really strong performance. They probably should have won the game by a bit more. They dominated the first half, especially against St Kilda. So all the talk about whether they stripped the list back too much, I still think that's a valid conversation because that might explain their lack of consistency in those matches, but I think they're on the right track. There's green shoots, if you will, for Hawthorn.
I think you're right there. Daz, at the start of the year, you looked at Jai Newcombe and you thought he could potentially be a best and fairest chance. How's he gone so far?
Yeah, had a very good season last year. His numbers this year also read pretty well. 4th for possessions, 1st for tackles, 5th for goals, 2nd for clearances, 2nd for contested possessions. So he'd be right in the mix. James Sicily, who played probably the game of the season on the weekend, took 1,000 marks and had 43 possessions. He'll be up there. And James Warple's a really solid player for Hawthorn, so they're probably the 3.
What about the surprise packet so far?
Yeah, so at the start of the year, we looked at guys like Reeves, who's a promising ruckman. He's had averaged 28 hit-outs a game. Ward's a good player, 21.5 possessions he's averaging, but Connor Nash is having a tremendous season for Hawthorn. He's averaging 25 in the last, across the 11 games, had 30 plus 3 times, so he's been excellent for Hawthorn.
And Mitch Lewis is a player that missed a lot of the year so far with injury. Him and probably Chad Wingard could lift a little bit.
Yeah, so Lewis, obviously, since he's come back into the side, he took 12 marks against the Bulldogs and he kicked 6 against West Coast, kicked 3 on the weekend against the Saints as well. He's a really important part of their side and one of the better emerging key forwards in the competition. So he'll be important. And Wingard, a little bit inconsistent. He's had some injuries as well, but he's a guy that can give them something just with his class if he's available more often than not.
That's right, Daz. And are you having a betting play with Hawthorn? How do you see them going in the second half of the year?
There's probably not a lot of areas, again, necessarily to back them. At the start of the year, a lot of the interest was in the fewest wins market, which they're not going to do. Mackenzie was a good chance for the rising star, but a few others have gone ahead of him. I'd probably look at, generally their games are fairly low scoring. So I think as a general rule, if you play the unders for total points in most of the games they play, you're probably going to win more often than not.
Obviously, North Melbourne started off 2-0, but have failed to win a game since then. Look, let's talk about the breakout player potentially, and it's a bit of a sad story with Charlie Comben, isn't it?
It is indeed, Carl. Yeah, Charlie was showing some really good signs for the first 6 rounds until he suffered another very serious injury in the form of a fractured fibula against Melbourne. So, yeah, big shame for him. He wasn't necessarily hitting the scoreboard as such, but his aerial presence and contest work was very good. So
yeah, 100% agree, Tom. And I think he's a pivotal player to get games into. It doesn't matter if he's stuffing the stat sheet. As a young player, you want to get games into him. So hopefully it doesn't interrupt his career progression too much. We're going to talk about who you thought was the best and fairest Smoky pre-season. He's had his injury issues, but you're going to be pretty harsh with Ben Mackay.
Yeah, I am, Carl. Sort of coming into 2023, I really thought Ben Mackay would cement himself almost as an All-Australian candidate, to be honest with you. And since he's returned from his foot injury, he missed the first 4 games of the season, he's been pretty disappointing. So I'll just hit you with some stats here. So in round 5 against Brisbane, his direct opponent, Joe Danaher, kicked 5 goals, 3 on him. In round 6, Ben King kicked 5 on him. In round 7, he was opposed to Van Rooyen, who only kicked the 1 goal, but he was just in his 5th career game, so we're not counting that as a scalp. In round 9, 3 goals, 5 to Jeremy Finlayson. And in round 10, Buddy kicked 3 on him. So if we go by those numbers, he's had just the one head-to-head win versus direct opponents this year. And for a guy who's supposedly commanding or wants to command big dollars on the free agency market, I think his form has left a bit to be desired, to be honest.
I think you make some good points there, Tom. One I'm just going to bring up with you is that North Melbourne ranked 13th in the AFL for opposition inside 50s per game, and they also ranked 16th for opponent goal assists per game. So directly correlated with goal assists there. Could be some sort of issue with Ben Mackay's form. Do you think there's some midfield issues potentially as well and easy access going inside 50?
Yeah, it's certainly not all down to the one man Mackay. It's contingent upon the midfield to help the defence out and apply pressure and tackle and the like. So it is down to the midfield, maybe not tackling and applying that much needed pressure. But they're a young midfield and he's an experienced player, so he should be doing better.
Let's talk about your big surprise so far, and it's Ben Cunnington, Tom.
Yeah, so it's been a bit of a sad tale for a legend of the North Melbourne Footy Club, and to be honest, a criminally underrated player in the league for the best part of 15 years. Karl, he's found himself in the VFL the last 2 or 3 weeks, and he's slowed down a fair bit, and so in many respects, it's a good sign that the likes of Phillips, Wardlaw, and Simpkin now have the keys to the midfield, but certainly a sad demise for Cunners, as North fans call him.
What do you think Ben Cunnington needs to do, Cunners, to get back into that side?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think in terms of his motivation, what's his motivation like? I mean, he's achieved a lot. I think he's won 2 or 3 club best and fairest. He's played 250 career games and he's been through his cancer battle. So I just wonder how much is left in the tank, Karl. So it'll be interesting if he goes on another year or if he goes out in the next sort of 10 weeks or so.
You make some good points there. Obviously, losing's pretty deflating, as we know. But hopefully we can see him back in the side and playing some good football, because the end is closer than the start of his journey, obviously. So we predict he's going to retire at some point, but hopefully he can retire out on top. Tom, let's talk about a summary of the season so far. I'm keen to hear from you and to dissect how North Melbourne started versus how they're playing right now.
Yeah, so things were looking good, Karl, after the first 2 weeks. 2 and zip to start the year with a win over both Perth sides. And yeah, the Clarkson, I suppose Clarkson ball, as North fans were calling it, was in full effect, restricting the opposition's scores and whatnot. But and sort of in the last, or perhaps since round 2 to about round 9, the form really dropped off for North, and big scores were conceded. Opposition midfielders getting on top, getting 30 plus disposals, which is never going to win you games, Karl. So it's sort of since round 10, admittedly, against Sydney and against Collingwood, 2 pretty good teams, there's been an upturn in form, and the young kids continue to show some really good promise. So.
You talk about those young kids, and I've been very impressed with some of the young brigade at North Melbourne. The one I want to talk about, and I want to give you a massive pump up here, Tom, because you were massive on Harry Sheasel for the Rising Star at a massive price at $13. So you thought that was huge value at the start of the season. You went and saw him play a couple of games and you thought there's no way that this kid should be $13 for the Rising Star. He's now second favourite, but you could argue that the prices should be a lot closer between him and Brisbane young gun Will Ashcroft.
Yeah, last look, Karl, I believe Ashcroft was $1.85 and Sheasel $2.85, so a full point difference there in the Rising Star market. And to be honest, I think that's incorrect because Sheasel's capacity to influence off the halfback flank and in recent weeks in the forward line has been particularly impressive, and his skill set, his kicking is remarkable. He's showing up some of his senior teammates with some of the things he's doing, and accumulating the ball, which is really hard to do. So I can't fault what Harry's been doing, and pretty happy about the $13, Karl, that we secured.
Well, it's funny because if you surveyed 100 people, I reckon you'd split smack down the middle of 50 people saying that Harry Sheezel should win the medal and 50 people saying that Will Ashcroft should win the medal. So in turn, the price should be closer to $2, which potentially makes Harry Sheezel value at that point. Is that something that you potentially would push punters into betting on?
Probably not actually at this stage, Karl. I think the congested, in terms of the rising star market, there are so many great candidates this year. Not just Ashcroft and Sheezel. You've got Matthias Philippou. You've got Ruben Ginbey from West Coast. Some really good. It's a really good draft.
Mitch Owens is third in the line.
Mitch Owens, correct. So it's a really good draft class, and I think. We'll just sit pretty with the $13, I think.
Port Adelaide, and they're just on fire at the moment, Daz, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. They were a mini crisis when they lost to Adelaide in round 3, because I don't think everybody knew how good Adelaide were. But since then, Port Adelaide have won 8 in a row. They've beaten Sydney in Sydney. They've won games in Melbourne against teams like St Kilda. They've beaten Essendon, who are a pretty good side. They've beaten Melbourne and Richmond. So really putting it together. They thumped Brisbane in round 1 as well, of course, before those back-to-back losses. So their form line is really impressive. They're up to second on the table and looming as at this stage, potentially the biggest threat to the Pies.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I completely agree. In the best and fairest race, you had Todd Marshall as a potential pre-season smoky dad.
Yeah, and then unfortunately he's been injured a bit. He's been concussed a couple of times. He's kicked 11 goals in about 7 or 8 games, which has been a bit underwhelming, but I think he can only make them better. And guys like Dan Houston and Jason Horne-Francis are enjoying very good seasons through the middle, but I think their BNF at this stage would be all towards a youngster in Zach Butters.
Well, let's talk about Zach Butters right now. And it's not that he wasn't a rising star, but you really picked him to have a breakout year. Tell us about his stats so far.
Yeah, so he's averaging more possessions in the last 8 weeks than any other player in the comp, which is an average of 30.2. Had 41 against Melbourne, which is a career high. And interesting barometer. So he's averaged 28.9 now in their last 12 wins. Averages about 20 when they lose. So when he plays well, they get up generally. And we've spoken a bit about it on Trade Talk, that he's gone from as high as 500s into now about $10 for the Brownlow. So yeah, he's emerging in a midfield that's already got Ollie Wines and Rosie and those sorts of players as close to their best.
A massive mood for the Brownlow medal. There's probably not many places on the ground that Port Adelaide could improve, but if you could pick a couple of players that could lift, who are you picking, Daz?
Well, remarkably, their key forward strength was built around Marshall and Dixon, but through injury and form, they've kicked 24 goals in 15 games, which is a fairly modest output from those two combined, and they've won 8 in a row and sit second. So to think that they can get a lift out of those guys, Finlayson served them really well forward,
He has.
also spending a bit of time in the ruck, but if one of Marshall and Dixon, or preferably both, can stand up, that'll be huge for them. And obviously Travis Boak's been a little down, been subbed out a couple of times, and Xavier Dersma been injured a bit. They're two guys that can help them.
Darcy Byrne-Jones is also one that's gone up forward, and he's hit the scoreboard a couple of times. And yeah, like you say, I really have enjoyed the season of Jeremy Finlayson. Taz, what do we do with Port Adelaide for the rest of the year?
Yeah, so their ability in close games has really set them up. They won by 2, 4, 5, 7 and 10 in this run of matches. So very similar to what Collingwood did last year. The key for them is obviously to secure top 4. They were top 4 in 2020 and 2021 and obviously lost home preliminary finals in both of those years to Richmond and the Bulldogs. And the key for them is obviously to get through that, and then whether they have the capacity to, say, beat a Collingwood at the MCG. But in terms of markets, there's still pretty good value for the top 4 that have been hovering around the $2 mark, got as high as $2.96. So the other one I wanted to look at is there's a market on Betfair for the highest ranked non-Victorian team. That's effectively a 2-horse race. It's either going to be Port Adelaide or Brisbane. Brisbane are about $1.35. Port Adelaide are about $2.66 in a 2-horse race, and I would suggest that should be almost even money. So the odds on Port are good. Yeah.
Interesting also that Port are currently ahead at the halfway point of the season.
Correct.
And yeah, that's a big discrepancy in odds.
Yeah, so I'd like Port in an even money 2-horse race.
We're going to talk about Richmond, currently 3 wins, 7 losses, and of course the draw against Carlton in round one. Daz, how have you seen Richmond's season so far?
Yeah, it's been underwhelming. Obviously, they finished last year really well and made the finals, and then they added Taranto and Hopper, and the expectation was that they would push up and challenge for top four. And first two rounds, obviously a draw with Carlton, who were much spruiked at the time. Then they beat Adelaide at the Adelaide Oval, which on reflection seems quite a result, given how good Adelaide have been at home since. But lost 5 in a row after that, and obviously losing to Essendon a couple of weeks ago in the Dreamtime game was a real hammer blow on their season, getting beaten by a point. They've had their fair share of injuries. A lot of their defenders, like Tarrant and Gibkiss, and obviously Tom Lynch forward has been an issue for them. But obviously now with Damien Hardwick stepping away, it's that sort of caretaker feel for the remainder of the year with Andrew McQualter. So, look, the Tigers have been an unbelievable side for a long time, and it's okay if the era comes to an end, but it certainly appears that that's the case.
It was a massive story that broke just recently that Damien Hardwick would not coach out the remainder of the year. And of course, as you say, Andrew McWalter taking over as interim coach. That's a real interesting one. At the start of the year, as were their odds on the Betfair exchange, Damien Hardwick thought it was going to be a last dance sort of opportunity with Richmond, where he could coach out one more year and it potentially would be a fairy tale, because he just absolutely categorically ruled out to himself, which we didn't know in the media, that he wasn't going to be coaching next year. So that's a really interesting one. At the start of the year, you gave Daniel Rioli a big pump up and said he could be potentially a best and fairest Smoky.
Yeah, he's been very good. Would probably be top 5. Tim Taranto has been amazing for Richmond, averaging 32 possessions a game. He's kicked, I think, 11 goals for the season, 33 and 4 on the weekend against Port Adelaide. Liam Baker and Shea Bolton have been pretty solid. And yeah, Rioli very good too. So he's in the mix, but Taranto would be leading Richmond's best and fairest at the moment and would have probably double-figure Brownlow votes as well.
What I love and what I will say about Daniel Rioli is he's just been electric on that half-back line. I think it was a masterstroke putting him back there, and I've really enjoyed watching him play. Surprise packets. Who have you got there, Daz?
We nominated Noah Cumberland at the start of the year because he finished last year so well. He struggled a little bit, 6 goals in 6 games, been in and out of the side. There were issues on work rate, I think, at the start of the year. He kicked 3 in the first half against Melbourne when they were playing very well on the Anzac Day Eve fixture, but they'll be hoping to get a bit more out of him. Samson Ryan's come in pretty good. He's kicked 11 goals, 140-odd hit-outs through 10 matches, kicked 3 in a near match-winning effort against Adelaide in round 2, so he's been solid.
Who can lift Daz?
Well, Dion Prestia is often a barometer. I talk to a lot of Tigers fans who have always said he's their most important player.
And I think Dimmer used to say that too.
He hasn't been bad by any stretch of the imagination, but averaging 19.8 possessions a game and only 21 tackles. He's been down in both of those areas from a usually strong output, and they haven't had Nankervis and Lynch much this year, so it's not on them to lift, but obviously you want them out there, and that'll certainly help Richmond get better.
I feel like under Dimmer, Dion Prestia in the first half of the year was actually playing a bit of a different role. In Dion's first game with Andrew McWalter, I think he got him back into the engine room.
Yep.
And we saw Dion actually have near 30 disposals, and he was absolutely everywhere marking the ball around the ground. So, yeah, could we see Dion Prestia have a really, really strong second half of the year? In his last game, that would probably prove so. Your summary for the Tigers, Daz?
Yeah, I think they're going to be dangerous for the rest of the year. They're not going to make the finals. I think we're going to see similar to what they did against Port Adelaide, where they were pretty competitive. They asked questions of good size. They're a little bit limited in some of their skill sets and some of the form of their experienced players, but they'll be hard to beat without necessarily winning a stack of games, but they'll be a difficult little side to play against, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Daz, and there's probably not much to do on the Betfair exchange in terms of betting on Richmond, is that right? Yeah,
so obviously there's no point sort of laying them top 8, laying them top 4. They're not going to make it, and I think they're too short now in terms of missing it. There's probably not a heck of a lot you can do other than just playing around in the individual match markets. I think they're going to start underdogs in most games, but they are going to pinch some contests, so it's almost like just finding the mark, I think, on those.
Currently 7 wins, 4 losses, 5th on the ladder. They started the season on fire. Daz, how is St Kilda going?
Yeah, won their first 4 with a stack of injuries. They've been fairly average since then, probably 6 good weeks, 5 average weeks. Needed the bye, a horror loss going into that bye, but obviously Max King coming back and kicking 4 in each of the last 2 weeks is a good result. And I think at the start of the year, if they were offered 7 and 4, they would have taken it. If they were offered 7 and 4 last week, they wouldn't have, but at the start of the year, they would have.
That's right, Daz. Well, earlier in the year, we did a best and fairest Smoky and a rising star pick. How have your picks gone? Let's start with the rising star.
So we had Marcus Windhager and Hunter Clark. Hunter Clark's been very good, played every game, got injured on the weekend, but has put a good season together. Windhager broke his hand in a pre-season game against Essendon and just hasn't quite been able to get back to it since then. He's averaged 35 in the last 3 weeks in the VFL, so he'll play against Sydney. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't, but clearly their breakout player has been Mitch Owens. He's had an outstanding season. Mateus Philippou has been pretty good, and Liam Stocker, who they got from Carlton, has been serviceable down back. But yeah, Mitch Owens has been one of the competition's breakout players.
Now, in terms of the best and fairest race, who's up there at the moment?
So our Smoky was Brad Hill, always plays well under Ross Lyon, and he's had a good year. He's probably top 5 or 6, but I think St Kilda's top 3 would be Jack Sinclair, who won it last year, Rowan Marshall, who's been very good in the ruck, and Cal Wilkie, who's been Mr. Reliable down back. So, but yeah, Sinclair, I'd be surprised if he's not considerably clear in the race for the best and fairest at the Saints.
Have you got a player that potentially could step up their game a little bit at the Saints?
So Tim Membry missed the first 5 or 6 weeks with a knee injury. He's come back via the VFL, struggled a little bit, went back into the AFL, got concussed. He's only played 3 and a bit games. He's a guy that in the second half of the year could give them something. And I still think Windhager, who we mentioned as the pre-season Smoky, he can change their midfield a bit, which has been a bit stale in the last month. Guys like Ross and Co have been a little bit down on form. So I think to get Windhager's clearance winning ability with some confidence in his game, he could give them a bit of a spark.
Yeah, that's a good shout, Daz. And St Kilda now halfway through the season. Are they making finals? Probably, you think. What are your thoughts so far?
Probably, although that was a bit of a blow for them. I guess for Saints fans, they're probably a little bit worried about deja vu. So last year they were 8-3 at the halfway point of the season. They had a really bad loss to Essendon, who were in the bottom 3 at the time, and then struggled to recover. They were 5-1, lost to Port Adelaide, same as this year, 5-1, lost to Port Adelaide, had a bad loss to a bottom 4 Hawthorn. So Saints fans will be hoping that it doesn't continue down that same path. The draw is a little bit better this year than it was last year. So I think enough has changed with some young players in that they should expect to avoid that fall away last year. At the start of the year, we thought that their odds were over for the top 8. They were $3.70 at the start of the year compared to teams like the Bulldogs and Fremantle. They got into $1.25. They're now $1.70. So far that bet's worked out okay. You could potentially trade off if you were worried they'd miss it. And then if you look at around the top 4 mark, they're still over the odds of teams like the Bulldogs and Fremantle and those sorts of sides in the market. So it's probably unlikely based on recent form, but yeah, and the other one would be Mitch Owens, who's 3rd elect for the Rising Star. He drifted from 6 to 10s because he missed a game. I still think there's potential for him, if Sheasel or Ashcroft dropped away at all for him to sneak up there.
That was a fantastic betting strategy at the start of the year. Just recapping that, St Kilda opened $3.70 to make the top 8 and got into $1.25. I think as a trading strategy, that's exactly what you want as an AFL punter. So big shout out to Daz there. How have the Sydney Swans gone this year? It hasn't been the best half of the season so far for them, has it?
Yeah, Karl, 5-6 to begin the year with a percentage of just over 101. They're sitting 11th on the ladder, and you'd have to say for last year's grand finalists, it's been a disappointing start.
Well, I was going to say, they were last year's grand finalists, and the expectation was that they were going to be easy picks for the top 8. But we're going to talk about the player that you thought was going to be or have a breakout year, had an excellent preseason. That was Errol Goulden. Yeah,
Errol's been terrific this year, Karl. He's probably now Sydney's most damaging player, you could say. Listen to some of these numbers. He's 5th in the league for total kicks, 1st at Sydney for average disposals per game, 1st at Sydney for inside 50s, 2nd at Sydney for tackles per game, and in the top 3 for both contested and uncontested possessions. So, yeah, he's been extremely impressive, Karl.
Yeah, those stats are amazing. And obviously you had James Rowbottom as your potential best and fairest Smoky. How's he gone so far?
Mixed first half of the season, Karl. Rowbottom's down in disposals to 16 per game, which is only rated average for starting midfielders in the AFL. And he's regressed from 18.4, which he was averaging in season 2022. And as a result of that, averaging fewer clearances and, yeah, just overall probably not having the impact he'd like, Karl.
Yeah, which is much to talk about, I suppose, with the Sydney players. I think a few of them have been down on form, but one that surprised has been Nick Blakey. He's actually been quite good.
Nick Blakey's been brilliant, Carl. He's gone from strength to strength in 2023, and he's averaging a career high in disposals, marks, uncontested possessions, and also a stat which sort of goes underrated for mine is 1%ers, which shows the sort of extra little things that the coaches love, and Blakey's certainly doing that this year. He's fourth in the league for total bounces as well, which highlights his impressive drive off the half back line, and his game against Carlton. We'll probably see him in the Brownlow votes, actually. So, yeah, he's been fantastic.
Yeah, he led the side for intercept possessions that game. Yeah, he's fantastic watching. And he's actually one of my favourite players to watch, the Lizard.
He's brilliant.
When he's at full speed running across the half-back line into the midfield,
he's got a funny sort of running gait, doesn't he? He sort of wobbles around, and
he's the Lizard.
It's very funny.
He's the Lizard. Well, Sydney as a whole, they rank third in the competition for tackles, which is amazing, but 14th for clearances per game. One without notice, Tom. We saw in recent times Isaac Heaney go into the midfield. Do you think that they're trying to address something there with the clearances?
I think so, Carl. I think Heaney's career has sort of, a lot of people compare him to Marcus Bontempelli and the career, I suppose, their respective career trajectories. And I think Heaney's been a half forward or for the majority of his career, and he's probably a better player than that. He probably needs to influence in the midfield more, and I think John Longmire and the Swans coaching staff get him in there and get him involved more.
I suppose they have the luxury of putting him at half forward because the Swans midfield usually is firing, but given that they're not going so well this year, it's a good move by Horse to get him into the midfield. Well, let's do a bit of a summary on the season so far. What are your thoughts, Tom, on Sydney?
Yeah, so one thing that stands out for me, Karl, is Sydney's form at home. So in the last 4 games, the Swans have lost 3 of them at the SCG. And for a fortress, or for the fortress that it usually has been in years gone by, I think the Swans would be disappointed by that, and they'll be looking to fix that up post-bye, particularly with winnable games against the Saints and West Coast to come at home.
And any betting strategies you're willing to have about the Swans this time, Tom?
I think with their continued injury list, with Callum Mills out for an extended period, the McCartan boys, unfortunately, we saw Paddy and now Tom have got serious concussion problems at the moment, and that's a sad thing for Paddy, as we know. But I think they're really key to their chances of success. And with those 3 guys out, Logan McDonald and even Joel Amati, who I thought showed some really good promise earlier in the year, aside Buddy Franklin, all those guys I've just mentioned are out of the side. Dane Rampy, another one. So just looking at these names, they're really formidable names. And without their sort of presence on field, I can't see Sydney doing much, to be honest, in the second half of the year. And I think laying them to make the top 8 is a good play.
Which is a big call, and they're currently the price that if you want to do that, you can only do it on the Betfair exchange. Before we finish up, I just want to mention Chad Warner, currently leading the Sydney Swans players in predicted votes, has 12.5 according to the Betfair Brownlow predictor. That's currently makes him sit around the $50 mark on the Betfair exchange. In recent weeks, the last couple of weeks, he's predicted to get 5 votes. After stagnating in round 6, 7 and 8. But he's another player that could potentially, at the price, there could be a trading opportunity there. What do you think, Tom?
I think so, Karl. And I've just got one more stat to bring to you, is that perhaps the most telling thing for Sydney, or the most telling tale in their regression this year, has been the fact that they ranked 10th in the competition for contested ball and 14th for clearances. And in their grand final making year last year, they were top 3 in both of those categories. So I think that just highlights the decline, and that's perhaps why they're not quite the side they were last year.
We've got the job of talking about the West Coast Eagles, probably a job that isn't so exciting, but there's a fair bit to actually dissect with the Eagles, and I'm going to do it with Harry Stanley, and their season hasn't been too good to date, Harry. They're currently last on the ladder.
Yeah, they're 1 win, 10 losses, 54%. They're not playing well at all, Carl. Much worse than I think anyone expected, but they have been ravaged by injuries, so there is that element.
Harry, let's try to get positive about the Eagles. There's a player that the Eagles fans can be really positive about, and that is the person that you predicted to have a breakout year, and that's Oscar Allen.
Yeah, Oscar's been unbelievable. He's possibly one of the better or best forwards in the game at the moment. He's kicked 29 goals for the season, and with the Eagles only kicking 97 goals so far this season, he's almost kicking 1 in every 3 Eagles goals per game. So it's amazing what he's been able to do with the team he's playing with.
That's an incredible stat, Harry. And as a best and fairest smoky, you also had Elliot Yeo, but like most of the Eagles list, he's had his injury issues as well.
Yeah, he's been injured for majority of the first 11 rounds. He returned against the Bombers, had 24 disposals and 11 kicks through the midfield. Not an amazing game, but it's his first game back, so hopefully he can play a bit better footy going forward.
We know when the West Coast Eagles won their premiership, he was such an integral part of that team. But their injury list as it stands, Oscar Allen is a test, but the longer term injuries, Tom Cole, Jamie Cripps, Jai Cully, Jack Darlin, Shannon Hearn, Jermaine Jones, Jeremy McGovern, Nick Naitanui, Sam Petrevski-Seaton, Liam Ryan, Luke Shuey, Isa Winder, and Elliot Yeo's another test for his groin. So we are not joking there. That is their injury list, and there's premiership players in there and players that they need, to help develop those younger ones around. But let's talk about a bit of a summary of the West Coast Eagles so far this season. How have you seen their season?
Yeah, so like we've said, for the big club in the West, they've just been rife with injuries, and that's just killed their season dead in the water. So I wasn't expecting much from them pre-season, but
you were expecting more than this.
More than this, 100-point loss, to the then 17th place Hawthorn. That was atrocious football. So there's no sugarcoating it with the Eagles season. They've got the wooden spoon all sewn up. For me, I think that's a good bet. They're currently $1.20 on the exchange for least season wins, and I think I'll be backing that one.
Another one I wanted to ask you about is Andrew Gaff. How have you seen his season so far?
It's been quite average compared to his career. Gaff's averaging only 20 disposals, which is 6 less than his career average. His kicks are down. His handballs are down. He's really having a slower season than he has in his whole career.
Yeah, I think when you look at his kicks now this year, which are below average, he's averaged 15 or just more than 15 kicks, which is in the elite status. But now only 9 kicks per game, which is really, really low. And that's just a bit of an indictment on him. He's probably handballing and feeling the pressure a little bit more. He's averaging the same amount of handballs. So I don't know, maybe it's an indictment on the way West Coast are playing, not giving him as much opportunity in open passages. But did you have any betting strategies for the West Coast Eagle, or are you happy to just leave them as it is?
Yeah, like I've said, I think they're going to take out the wooden spoon. So I think $1.20 on the exchange for least season wins is a good back. But for you, Karl, with the questions about the coach with Adam Simpson and the club and the medical staff, where do you see Simpson staying at the club at the end of the year?
I think that Adam Simpson should be an AFL coach. I just don't think it should be at the West Coast Eagles. It's probably time for him to have a little bit of a break, reassess. They probably need just someone new to come in and pump them up. Adam Simpson's one of the longest serving coaches in the AFL at the moment at his one club. So yeah, I expect there to be some sort of coaching change. The Western Bulldogs find themselves in the top 8 after half of the year gone by. Harry, how are the doggies going so far?
They're doing quite well, Karl. They're 7-4 with 106%. As he said, they're inside the 8. So, yeah, they're doing quite well.
They're doing quite well. And a player that you thought was going to have a breakout year was Jamara Ugle-Hagan. How's Jamara gone so far?
He's had quite a slow start to the season. I was expecting a bit more out of him. He had a great 5-goal haul against the Lions. And that was, where he pointed to his skin in an ode to Nick Winmar and a protest against racism. But since then, he's only managed 6 goals in 8 games, and there was a couple of no-goal games in there. So he's slowed down, but hopefully he can come home with a wet sail.
Yeah, he's obviously a young player, so we expect him to continue to progress his form throughout the year. And in terms of best and fairest smokies, you had a couple that you wanted to talk about. Aaron Norton was one, and the other is Tim English. But firstly, on Aaron Norton, how have you seen his season so far?
Yeah, he's had a great season so far. You know, he's led from the front, and he's kicked quite a lot of goals for them, and he's always a staple down forward for them. You know, if they need to kick it in long to a contest, he's always there to be that man.
100% agree. If you need to rely on a big mark from a player at some point of the game, you can look at Aaron Norton. What about Tim English? He's having a fantastic year.
He's having an exceptional season, Karl. He's ranking in the elite category for disposals and kicks, and the above average category for hitouts. With 28.5. He's improved in every category: disposals, kicks, handballs, total clearances, hitouts, and total hitouts to advantage, compared to his career average. So that's a show of how well he's doing this season. And you know, the amazing thing about Tim English is he's got so much room to grow still. He's still young, 25 years of age. You know, he could still become one of the elite ruckmen if he isn't so far in the AFL.
Yeah, great call, Harry. I completely agree with that. And it wouldn't be a mid-season report card or preview without talking about Marcus Bontempelli. He's currently the leader in predicted votes for all the Western Bulldogs players, according to Betfair's Brownlow predictor. How have you seen his season, Harry?
Bond's been, exactly what we expected. You know, we had him at the start of the season to win the Brownlow. More as a trade option. I saw a lot of value in his price before the start of the season, and now he's into $6.60. It was a great trade from start to now, and I think, you know, he might even drift out a little bit from his current price, and I think if he does, he's a good back price to actually take it out.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call. And I thought $20 at the start of the season was way too long for Marcus Bontempelli. He quickly got into $12, and then he got as short as $4 at a point. He's right behind Nick Dacos in Brownlow medal voting. Some of the other players that have predicted votes Marcus Bontempelli is predicted to have 13 halfway through the season. Next is Bailey Smith, who's an interesting one because he started the season really slowly, and then in the last couple of rounds before the bye, he's had 2 best on ground performances. Adam Treloar has been a little bit inconsistent, not his performances, just being on the field with injury, missing with hamstring issues. And obviously Tom Liberatore, you know what you're going to get out of him. He's a fantastic player. He's got 3 votes. So really out of those players, you look at Marcus Bontempelli, he's probably the clear favourite for the Western Bulldogs to potentially be up there on Brownlow night. But we're going to talk about our summary of the Western Bulldogs and any potential betting strategies we've got for the rest of the year, Harry.
Yeah, the Doggies have had quite a slow start to the season. You know, they had 2 huge 50-plus point losses to the D's and Saints in the first 2 rounds. But then they bounced back. They've won 7 from 9 games, and what's surprising me is just they're a bit inconsistent. They've only beaten 3 teams inside the 8. That are currently inside the 8, and they've had just come off a loss to 12th place Gold Coast. So for me, I'll need to see them win more games against those top 8 sides to really see if they're a real finals contender and a real premiership contender.
I reckon Gold Coast aren't that sort of team that you can say that they're an easy beat these days. You say 12th on the ladder, but between 12th and 6th, it's really 4 points or something ridiculous. But you have a look at the high rankings of the Western Bulldogs team. They're ranked 2nd for clearances per game, 3rd in least opponent handballs per game. Some of the lower rankings they have, they're 13th in points per game, which is kind of surprising. They used to be a team that really used to get pedalled to the metal with their offense. So it'll be interesting to see what Luke Beveridge can do to continue to improve their attack this season. But Harry, have you got a Betfair Exchange betting strategy for the Doggies for the rest of the year?
No, I think the bets that I had at the start of the season was Doggies to make the top 4 and to make the top 8. I think they're a lock for the top 8. But it'll be interesting to see if they can get into the top 4 at the end of the regular season. I think if they do, you know, they're a real chance for the premiership, as any side is if they finish in the top 4. And again, if Marcus Bontempelli drifts from that 660, I think he's a good bet for the Brownlow.
One that surprised me, Harry, is Liam Jones a little bit. I knew he was going to be a good player, but I didn't realise how influential he would be for the Doggies. So he's another one to watch. I'm sure he's going to be high in the best and fairest voting as well. Well, that's all we got time for in our mid-season preview or review of the Doggies. Catch the Betfair Hub for more mid-season reviews.
Imagine what you could be buying instead. For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.